Hello and welcome back to How to Homeschool in High School, the podcast focused on encouraging and equipping you to homeschool through high school. I'm your host, Nadine Laufer, and in today's episode number 23, we're going to get a look into the history curriculum Nomadic Professor by talking with one of the co-creators, Mr. Noorlander. So the new school year is coming up very quickly, and this is the time when we're normally looking for curriculum options for the upcoming school year. So for the last few weeks, we've kind of been going into some of my favorite curriculum. We started with Dr. Weil and Brian Builders, and then last week we got to hear from Dr. Shorman. And so today we get to continue that by talking with Mr. Noorlander from the Nomadic Professor. And the thing that's different about this week compared to the last two is I have actually never used the Nomadic Professor's curriculum, but I really wish I had. That's why I want to share it here, because I always want this to be a place where you can gain new equipment to successfully homeschool through high school. So the Nomadic Professor is a really unique curriculum because it is completely online and they add a nomadic element to it, and it kind of brings history to life in a different way. So the professor travels around and teaches from different locations for whatever, for American history, it's going to be all these different places in America. For world history, it's going to be across the globe. It's really neat, and I've never seen anything like it before. So I really am excited for you to hear more about it. In this interview, I'm going to be talking with Mr. Noorlander. I really, really enjoyed speaking with him. He had so much to share and encouragement for homeschoolers, and also just encouragement to pursue learning, and not just so you can get a good grade on a test, but also to learn very valuable life skills that will help you out when navigating this kind of crazy information overloaded world. So we talk about Nomadic Professor, but we also talk about critical thinking skills and also the importance of bringing history to life beyond just the page. So I'm excited to share with you. I hope you enjoy this interview as much as I did. So yeah, without further ado, let's just dive right in. Thank you so much for being with us today and for talking about your curriculum and everything. I'm excited to hear about it.
Yeah, it was nice to meet you at the convention, and I'm happy to chat.
Yeah, so I was going to actually start with that. The first time we heard about Nomadic Professor was through Great Homeschool Convention, so you're obviously very heavily involved with the homeschooling community as of now, but I saw that you were like a teacher for a while in China too, which is pretty amazing. So were you always involved in the homeschooling community, or is this something relatively new?
Relatively new. I've been in the classroom since 2012.
Okay.
And I stopped in 2020, a mix of charter schools and international schools. But the homeschool explicit focus started in 2020. It's sort of, my partner and I just decided to go all in. We've been sort of dabbling for a few years before that, but it was just too slow when we were trying to run separate careers. So that's when I jumped in full time, is 2020.
Yeah. So is that how kind of it started? Like, what was the idea behind the Nomadic Professor?
Well, I actually am late to the project, so to speak. My partner is the Nomadic Professor. His name is Dr. W. Kessler Jackson. Known him for a long time, and we've talked about doing something together for a long time, but he actually launched the brand The Nomadic Professor in 2016 with a YouTube channel. So he spent years on the road in the US, in Asia and Europe. He's based in Egypt right now, filming in Africa and Europe and the Middle East. So he started that back in 2016, been on the road on and off for the last 8 years or whatever. And then we talked, on and off from 2016 to 2020. But like I said, when it was just a side project for me and my day job was teaching in the classroom, I had no time, and the courses were being developed at an impossibly slow pace. And our courses are pretty ambitious. They're not, sort of formulaic. they're pretty rigorous projects. And so, anyway, that's a long way of saying together we started selling like nomadic courses in 2020, not really because of the pandemic, but that was
Mm.
just a good transition time because I was leaving the school I was at in China anyway, and it was kind of a nice natural break in my career plans, and so we jumped in it full time together.
That's really neat. And could you explain a little bit more about what the Nomadic Professor is and how it's different from other history curriculums?
Yeah. So the first thing to say is the nomadic element we think is unique.
Mhm.
Every course, every session, we try to bring the location to the student, which we hope is engaging and interesting just intrinsically, whether you love the nuances of historical thinking or not. Seeing a place, hearing the sights and sounds, hearing from a professional who is there, kind of getting the feel on the ground. We hope all of that is engaging, interesting, and kind of a hook into a subject that sometimes students don't naturally prefer. So that's one thing that's different. It's taught by a professor. And when I say we jumped into it full time, I should clarify he still works as a professor. He teaches a couple hundred students at different universities. He's based in Egypt, but teaching online for two different programs. Um, so he is, running his university classrooms as well as this project together. So that's unique. The professor is everywhere, and we think that's an interesting and engaging way to bring the curriculum to life. Another unique bit, I would say, is our focus on literacy and the complexity and nuance of history. Different curriculums, I think, have different goals, but if your goal is just to get a kind of a basic narrative and framework of what happened in the past, then there are a lot of textbooks that sort of cover A to Z in the story. And that's part of our goal. And that's a huge part of history, is just kind of having a basic knowledge base to draw from. But we try to go beyond that in the sense that we want students to be aware of errors in thinking, tendencies to think in black and white ways, to make caricatures out of, past people or events, to think in really simple terms about what happened and what didn't, what's good and what's bad. We really want to get into nuance and complexity and bring out the areas of the past that are very gray and hard to make judgments about because we're dealing with a foreign time and place and foreign sets of values, and all of these things are incredibly important, but they sort of get missed in our tendency or inclination to make quick judgments. So we really do a lot to try to bring out both methods and literacy in the past. How do historians work? What does good history look like? What does nuance mean? Why are we trying to complicate the story instead of make it simpler? We do a lot of work with primary and secondary sources. We do a lot of work training students how to make comparisons between sources so that they're able to make judgments about reliability, credibility, and all of that. And so the long and short of that part of the answer is that we want students to be able to make judgments instead of learn, or not instead of, but in addition to learning answers. We hope that prepares them well for future study in history and for, we think that skill transfers well outside of history, regardless of what you go on to do. So, yeah, I know that was a long answer, but that's what I would say. That's what makes us different.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so important because history is often very subjective to like either the author of the book or just the way that's presented. So it's really cool that you're teaching kids how to think about what they're learning and everything and how to
Yeah,
interpret it.
and I would, you know, we're still we still operate recognizing that subjectivity can't really be overcome. Like we're just people with a point of view.
Mhm.
Um, and so we're not making any claims to some kind of absolute objectivity, but we're just trying to make bare, make explicit and plain to the student what's going on underneath the surface when we make historical judgments. How do we compare historical judgments? Why does this person say this and this person say this? So we'll break down our own arguments, we'll break down the arguments of other historians. Our point of view is just as subjective as others, but if we can sort of lay out the methods that we're using and train students in how to make judgments about arguments, then we feel like that is an important layer of studying the past that sometimes gets missed.
Yeah, and on the topic of the being nomadic part of it, we got to go to Jamestown and Yorktown this summer, and we learned about all the battles of Yorktown and everything with the Revolutionary War, but it was really cool being there and actually being able to see it. So it's really neat that you're able to learn, at least the professor's there, so he can show you like the actual place. There's something different about just being able to see it than just reading about it, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, it really does make it come alive,
Mm-hmm.
whether you're looking at a log cabin or a forest or a river or some mud structure or whatever. It sort of puts flesh and bone on an otherwise really dry and abstract story.
Mm-hmm.
So being there is incredible because you sort of get to make sense of the past in a new way. You see a context and a setting that can kind of provide insights or shift paradigms. And so, you got to go to some places in the US, and lots of families really like that on location experience. And so they'll travel with their kids. And so, whether you travel or not, we hope that we're bringing to life some of those settings that even if you can reach some of them, you may not be able to reach all of them. So, yeah, we try to sort of virtually bring that on location experience and paradigm shifting sense of things to the courses.
I looked at your YouTube channel and I watched some of the videos, and it was really cool because I've like learned about them, but him actually being there, it's like, oh, that's really neat that that's a platform that allows you to do that, especially for homeschoolers. And so the podcast is specifically for a high schooler. So if you could just talk a little bit about, is your curriculum designed specifically for high schoolers, or is it kind of open for middle school as well?
It's designed for high schoolers.
Okay.
I think that's our strong suit, is sort of the high school and undergraduate age level. But that's not to say that a given middle school family or student couldn't get something out of it. I just hesitate to make a blanket recommendation
Mm-hmm.
because we do have seventh and eighth graders who try it, and we have eighth graders who stick with it, and then we have eighth graders who say, I need to wait a year or two. So it is definitely the initial target is high schoolers, maybe students who are thinking about college and want to develop, some skills that will prepare them to succeed as an undergraduate. But yeah, that would be our starting recommendation, and then families make their own judgments about what to use and not use if they have younger students.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And so you have currently, I know like American history is required for high schoolers. So is that the course you currently have available for high schoolers?
So we have a 4-part American history. We're currently publishing the third part. All 4 parts are for sale, but the fourth part is just, pre-sale.
Mm.
That will become available starting in December, and then it'll be fully published over the next 8 months or so after that. So that's our sort of big flagship 4-part survey course, partly because it's required, partly because it's, it is sort of foundational to the high school study for American students.
Mm.
We have other programs available and others coming. So we have a media literacy course that sort of builds on some of the historical methods and nuance and, discernment topics that we touched on before, but makes them less history focused and more just broad strokes. What does it mean to be literate with the internet, with the media? How do we get our head around the amount of information that's available today? So we feel like history is a good way into that. So we've developed a kind of course that is explicitly focused on that. We also have a half credit free course, free for any user, on the history of free speech. It's just a half credit elective course, structured very similarly to our other history courses. So you can find that on the site. And then our next survey programs to come out are our world course. We will start publishing next fall. It'll be probably 2 parts. I don't know if it will go with the 4 part that we have with the American history course, but a World One and a World Two survey course that will start coming out next fall. We have plans for our Asian history and lots of other courses in the works, American literature that are, sort of in development and come out as they're ready.
I can imagine that creating these takes a lot of time.
Yeah, not only the travel, which in and of itself just takes sometimes years of planning to get to a certain place. And he'll film, he has videos that he filmed years ago that are just now being used in different parts of the courses. And he's currently filming for future courses. So the logistics around the on location element are not simple and require a lot of planning, and upfront costs and time and money and things. So, and then you tack onto that the fact that we're trying to make these rigorous, original text and audio recordings and guided notes and document lessons. They're definitely time consuming to prepare. So we are moving at a pace that we're comfortable with, though we wish we could have our whole catalog out today.
Mm-hmm. And I had a question on the 4 part of the American history. Is it like each part for a year, or can you use like a part a semester, or is it kind of just like self-paced?
It's self-paced, but if you follow our recommended calendar, then each course would be a semester.
Okay.
So US 1 and 2 would be 1 year, US 3 and 4 would be 1 year. And some people take all 4 parts and they do American history for 2 years. They just fit it into their transcript in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
And other people like to choose just a 1 year version. So they'll do US 1 and 2 or US 2 and 3 or US 3 and 4, whatever period they haven't already covered or that they're interested in going deeper on. If you just want 1 year of US history, you can choose a kind of origins focus, pre-Columbian America through like Reconstruction, or you can choose a more modern focus that would cover the World Wars, Cold War, all the 20th century stuff. So that's how it's built.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Thank you. And I saw also on the website that you have different levels that you can go for, and then also CLEP prep for college credit. That's pretty neat as well.
Yeah. So we touched on our focus as kind of a high school audience, undergraduate audience. So if your sort of ideal trajectory is high school on to college, I think these are very good. It's a very good program. But that's not to say that if you are, still thinking about college, or you're going to move on to, a trade school or something else, that these aren't useful. The skills we're trying to build are useful regardless. But students who are thinking about college, we have a basic, standard, and advanced track in the course. The basic would be kind of a regular high school experience. You do the reading, you study some documents, you do the vocab, you take your notes. And while it's a robust experience, it wouldn't be much more than your average high school classroom, if that's what you're looking for. And then we have standard and advanced. Advanced would probably be students who are wanting to take like an AP test or a CLEP test in order to test out of certain college credits, or to get the credit that you would get from one of those exams. And then standard is like maybe like an honors course.
Okay.
You may or may not be going for college credit, but you want to challenge yourself. You want to be an expert. That would be our standard track.
Cool. That's really neat. So you can kind of customize that towards what you want. 'Cause I'm way more of a STEM-minded person. So history never really was my like main focus, but it's really fascinating. So like for me, it would probably be like a standard or a basic more. But for someone who was looking to like pursue history or something, would that be more of an advanced?
I mean, it could be pursue history. Like but I would guess, just based on our interactions so far, that you would do well in standard or advanced. It's not necessarily I want to be a historian. It's
Mm,
more like I am interested in thinking carefully. I am
mm,
interested in going deeply. I'm interested in making comparisons and developing strong skills for personal judgment. Because whether you do history or you do one of a million other things with your life, you're going to have to make judgments about what you read online. COVID uh, showed us how easy it is to find the information you want to find
mm,
online. And you can sort of trap yourself in a silo or a chamber of voices who only pat you on the back for believing what you already believe.
mm,
And, it takes a little bit of training and effort to look for sources that contradict your beliefs, challenge your beliefs, look for sources that are not only just sources that say what you already think, but that are coming from a reliable or credible place, and are you're not being manipulated, or you're not making judgments purely based on emotional factors
mm,
or personal biases. So these are skills that are relevant, regardless of your future path. And so if you're interested in being a sort of competent consumer of information and thinker about the past and the present, standard and advanced are perfectly appropriate,
mm.
regardless of whether you want to study history. If that makes sense.
Oh yeah, that does. And I definitely find myself falling into that pattern of thinking that sometimes like courses are only specific to what you're going to do in your future. And but the cool thing about homeschooling is all our curriculum, well, eventually the way that most of them are designed is to help you in your future, not only just help you in your career. So I think a lot of people have a misunderstanding when it comes to like harder subjects like or unliked subjects, if you will,
Yeah.
like history and math, that is only relevant if you're actually going to pursue that. But I love how you are focused on like giving kids skills that they can use no matter what career field they go into.
Yeah,
So,
that was a frustration. I don't know if I really occurred to me until college,
mm,
but and so you're more advanced than I am. But uh, it occurred to me late that a focus on career, like an exclusive focus on your career, limits your
mm,
educational experience, because it just becomes a track to this is good for this, is good for this, is good for this certification, is good for this salary or whatever.
mm,
And you don't there's a means ends kind of thinking in that trap that really, you know, kind of devalues subjects that don't have an obvious career end. Like
mhm,
my undergraduate was philosophy, and the joke there is that you'll be able to think deep thoughts about being unemployed. Um, and obviously there's truth to that, but I think it also indicates the level to which we've bought into the line that education is for a good career.
mm,
And we want to be employable people with useful skills, of course,
mhm,
but we don't want to focus on career and salary to the extent that our education is, sort of shallowly focused, or narrowly focused. Maybe like a line worker in a factory, someone who just has a focus on one part of creating a bigger, product. They
mhm.
don't really have a sense for the bigger picture or where they fit. They're just doing their thing. And I think that might be similar to someone who looks at education as merely a something to produce a career.
Mm.
Uh, I think there's a way to be more well-rounded and sort of plugged into the broader experience than just the career experience.
Yeah, that's very true. My mom remembers high school. She didn't necessarily love history, and through homeschooling and learning all about history, she like fell in love with history, and she realizes the value of it no matter what like my career will be, probably
Yeah.
in science, but she always made an effort to say, history is very important for you to continue to learn. And I'm very grateful for that because it's so true.
So I was going to ask a question earlier, and then we moved on. But I wanted to ask, and I'm sorry if this puts you on the spot. You said you liked being on location in Jamestown, and
Mhm.
and I forget the other places you mentioned. Was your experience, did it provide like the foundation for new insight? Do you feel like it helped you understand and gain insight into the past? Like, for example, being there might help you see, might drive home the point that this is a different time and place with a different sensibility. It's not easy to make judgments about. Like that would be an insight versus like, oh, it makes it more interesting and more engaging if I can see it, but it doesn't necessarily help me make connections or understand it in some more profound way. I don't know if that makes sense. It might be a totally leading question. Tell me exactly what I want to hear.
No, no, I understand. I think honestly, at first it was more of a, oh, this is makes this history more engaging. But as I began to think about it more, I realized this was a completely different time and place, and they had completely different ideas. And, even the landscape itself, they were talking about how much the water has eroded. Like there was so much more land, but yeah, even the landscape has changed since then. There was something really cool. A lot of the museums that we were walking through helped with that. They helped you kind of imagine what it would be like to live there, and they had a lot of interactive, like recreations too, and
Mhm.
people there talking about it. So I have to say that it did give me a whole different appreciation for what happened in Yorktown, and then also like the struggles that they faced at Jamestown too, because they're like around the same area.
Mhm.
And some of these things I never knew or appreciated. And just like imagining them coming and seeing, the swamp area and trying to live there, it gave me a completely different appreciation for how much hard work went into creating the first established English settlement. So, and also some of the things that they did that we would like disagree with now. So, um, yeah, I think it was a bit of both. But I think
Yeah,
I left with more of appreciation of just being able to think more like them, if that makes sense, than I
yeah.
more like me.
I think that is incredibly important. Like the think like them piece, especially when history becomes political, that
Mm.
piece just gets jettisoned. Like it's not even, there's not even an attempt because it's not a value. If your goal is some contemporary political objective, then you don't value thinking like them. You value imposing your agenda on them. And
Mm.
so if it can help you sort of correct that presentist mindset and sort of put yourself in a time and place like, and have a real empathy and insight for taking people seriously on their own terms, yeah, I think that's important. Yeah, I hope that our videos do something like that. But yeah, so thank you for that insight. It is nice to hear other people's experience.
Yeah, and I think there's something about visualizing it, and sometimes when we just read it in a textbook, it can become very like dry. We don't have to use our imagination that much, but
Mm,
having a video or a picture or something, you know what happened there, and then you can see where it happened. You can kind of visualize it way more, and it just takes it to a whole different level, I think. So I
mm,
was going through all your like the information about your courses. I'm like, I wish I could go back to ninth grade and start over and use your curriculum. And I also tell my mom, like, my sister's entering high school this year. I'm like, you should look into this too for her American history. But
nice.
yeah, because I loved being there. I loved being able to see it. And that is something I think that's really cool that you guys offer.
Yeah, good. Well, it's nice to hear. There is something very nice about seeing and hearing a place that makes it less of a kind of textbook abstraction, like just a concept or an argument, and more like a lived experience,
Mhm.
So I think that's nice.
Yeah. And then also, like, they were real people who, like, had to find food and, water and, like, build houses. And sometimes that can be subtracted from the history book as well. They become, like, just names. And I think that's something that seeing the place also does. It's like just trying to imagine living there or
Yeah,
like showing up there on a boat and like, oh, we have to live here now compared to what they had in England. So speaking about Yorktown, I mean, Jamestown, I'm in my own head. I didn't explain that. But yeah, that does help as well.
yeah. The sort of, we have to build houses and we have to clear the swamps and all of that.
Mhm.
It helps to, it's easy for the people in the past to be used as symbols or illustrations of some ism or another, some movement. Like you can see American nationalism in this or that group of people, and you sort of look so big picture that you do lose the sort of flesh and bones of the people who are
Mhm.
like, clearing the fields or fighting the wars or whatever. So yeah, both perspectives are necessary, but
Mhm.
I think it's very nice to put some flesh on the bones of these complicated stories.
Yeah. And just to close, do you have any advice, or I was gonna say, why is it important for high school students to learn history? I think we kind of covered that a little bit, but do you have any advice
Mhm.
for high school students who not necessarily enjoy learning history, um, yeah, or are worried about learning history from home?
So I will offer from my point of view. So I was in the high school classroom full time for about 8 years, and then I've been doing this for the last few years. My point of view is sort of become solidified over the last couple of years. Not that it's not subject to change, but the way I see things now is to survive, not survive, that's a bit hyperbolic, but to feel a sense of competence and calm in our information overloaded world. I think it's helpful to learn a few foundational skills for discernment. And so, if I were to, edit that down into a one sentence tip, it would be like ask where the information came from.
Mhm.
You know, always. It doesn't matter whether it's from a friend or from the internet or from a family member, like where did the information come from? That kind of healthy level of skepticism can prevent all kinds of potential areas where someone can be misled. And it's getting more and more complicated because technology is making it easy to fake things and to harder to discern which sources to trust and all of that. So I don't want to oversimplify the complexity, but a basic orientation of I'm a little bit skeptical until something is corroborated or verified in one way or another,
Mhm.
I think is a healthy orientation. And so that question, where did the information come from, should be tattooed on the brain of every person, period, probably, but especially adolescents who are being formed in this period of time where there are too many claims, too many claims about the past made for contemporary political aims, and claims about this or that science or product made for you know that are complicated by motivations of profit and all of that. Like there's just a lot to be wary about. I don't want to promote like an absolute distrust of everybody and everything, but just
Mhm.
a
Okay.
general orientation of wariness and security, I think, is important. So that's one thing that can come from a good study of history, is just a basic sense of what methods should I use to make a judgment between one source and another. And when you transfer those methods outside of the history classroom, it just makes you a little bit more competent, a little bit less prone to alarm and panic, a little less prone to absolute credulity um, when you're dealing with information in a thousand other places.
Mhm.
So that would be my 2 cents. Where did the information come from?
Yeah, that's a very powerful question that I just recently really learned. I took a writing class, and my teacher was um, very purposeful in pushing that. Like, always make sure you know where you're learning from, and it's very easy to just believe whatever people are telling you. I
You
know
know,
on social media we get a ton of information. I'm always like, I wonder if that's actually true, and you have to do
that's
your
such
own
an
research.
important, like, filtering question.
Hmm.
Actually true. And it sounds sort of obvious talking about it like this in the abstract, but if someone gets on social media or on does a Google search for something or talks to a friend, like just we should try to pay attention to how easy it is for us to take something as true without really testing it very
Hmm.
much. It sounds obvious and everybody knows that, you gotta decide which sources to trust. But in actual practice, I think it's easy to go with our intuitions about what to trust and what not to trust, and to make judgments really fast without verifying them. And in many cases, that serves us well. We know how to drive a car without thinking too hard about it, but
Mm-hmm.
we can't rely on those same intuitions for, deciding what's true or false in more complicated scenarios that require that we slow down a little bit. So that's a good filtering question to ask.
Yeah, and I like that through learning history we can learn those tools as well. So it's not just about the actual, as it is not less than it, like learning the actual history, but it's also learning how to discern um whether or not you're believing something just because someone told you, or actually like doing the background work. Sorry, that
Yeah,
was a long way of saying it.
no, that makes sense. Like I probably have done a disservice to knowing history for the sake of knowing history. I think that is at least half the project, if not more.
Yeah.
You want to have a baseline of knowledge that you can draw from to make contemporary judgments. Russia invades Ukraine, or people talk about China and Taiwan, or China and Hong Kong. There are complicated historical events that inform the way we make sense of the world today. And just knowing the past
Yes.
in and of itself is incredibly valuable for being capable of making those judgments in real time. So I don't want to like do a disservice to that part of
Oh
the
no, yeah.
question. My head is always in the like discernment and judgment
Yeah.
space, and so I tend to talk about that more than I should. But yeah, they're both parts of the same project of literacy and knowledge that will just allow someone to be a little more competent today.
Yeah, no, it definitely, sorry if I made it sound that way too. Definitely, it's a very important to have understanding. I know with like all this Russia and Ukraine, my dad has been informing me of actually like what's the history behind that and
Mhm.
why it's not like all of a sudden a new conflict. Like there's things that led up to it. So it's so important to know that as well. And even things that happen in America that have historical roots that sometimes you just don't know, but it's important to know your history
Yeah,
as well.
you make knee-jerk reactions based on what your team is saying, or some emotional response, and we can make better informed judgments if we know a bit about the past.
Mhm. Thank you so much for talking with us today and for being here and taking time out of your schedule to do this.
Yeah, of course, I appreciate it. It was nice to chat, and you are impressive. Keep doing what you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much. So that is it for episode number 23. This was truly one of my favorite interviews that I have done so far. I really, really enjoyed talking with Mr. Noorlander, and it provided me with a lot of food for thought. And one of them being, I actually want to share with you. So I believe really now in this conventional schooling, modern education era, that history has become a passive subject. So it's simply just very 2D, very teach for the test, sort of memorize dates, and it's become impersonal. And people can kind of sit back and read, and it can be a very flat experience. And the more I learn history, especially in homeschooling, I begin to question that whole narrative. How can history be boring? Because in reality it's 3D, it's active. I mean, right now we are part of history. We are history in the making, if you will, and it is our daily life. And through curriculums like the Nomadic Professor, through teachers like Mr. Noorlander, we are able to gain back some of that immersive sort of excitement towards learning history. I mean, after hearing what he had to say and after looking through what the Nomadic Professor has to offer, I really had this excitement and this want to learn history this way. So I think the main takeaway from this whole entire interview is just be an active learner. Be active in questioning where the information is coming from. Be active in using your imagination and just picturing what they actually had to go through and reminding yourself these were real people and real situations with different worldviews than you do, and we can learn something from pretty much everyone we study. It is really a fascinating it's a fascinating study and a wonderful gift and opportunity we've been given to learn. So I feel like Nomadic Professor really, really works hard to cultivate these active learners. So if you're curious at all about the Nomadic Professor, I have linked pretty much everything they have in the show notes. Their website, which has all their course offerings, their YouTube channel, where you can check out some sample videos of like classes that you would have with the Nomadic Professor, their Instagram, pretty much anything you would want to look for. And I would highly recommend checking out their website and just scrolling through everything that they have to offer, or taking some of their free classes, which I'm actually going to do. If you want to get a feel for it first, I'm going to take that half a credit for my history this year. So I'm really excited about it. And if you have any questions whatsoever about anything we talked about or anything in general about homeschooling, please feel free to email me. My email is also linked below, as well as Instagram and Facebook, so you can follow while you're on there looking at the Nomadic Professor. You might as well just check out our Instagram page as well. So yeah, like I said, I really enjoyed this interview. A lot of food for thought, a lot of things I'll be thinking about for a while. And yeah, just actively learning. That's a really important part of homeschooling, and something we try to cultivate is a love of learning and also being an active and forever learner. So yeah, I really do see that fruit from the Nomadic Professor. And so that is officially it for episode number 23. Looking forward to next week. We are finally going to release that 12th grade episode. So How to Homeschool 12th Grade will be coming out next week. I look forward to that. It's going to be a really fun episode. Anastasia did a wonderful job, and I am looking forward to sharing it with you all. So thank you all for listening so much. As always, continue to stay curious, and we will see you all next week. Bye.